Stupid mask. Welcome back to the Talk with AVC as we are back again with our NBA segment. We are joined once again by my fabulous producer, Danny. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me again.
It is always great to have you here. Hey, you know what? You're entertaining, and people are tired of just hearing my voice. You need to insinuate something else in there, to keep your perspective. So we're going to be covering two things today. We're going to start with reactions to the first three games of the NBA Finals. Danny, as a Heat fan, how do you feel so far?
They didn't get swept. That's a win in my book.
That is a win. That is something good to see. I don't think a lot of people had them to get swept. I think most people thought they'd win a game. I think the big question is, can they actually make this series interesting?
They can, but I don't know if they will. They have to. First of all, it's no question that Bam Adebayo absolutely has to come back.
Yeah, that is the essential point of the Heat.
That he has to come back. They might be able to get away with winning another game without Dragic, but Bam definitely needs to come back. The Lakers were not able to adjust properly to the Heat's adjustments when they realized, okay, maybe we shouldn't really run small ball. So they stopped running the small ball lineup, which was good. They got Anthony Davis in foul trouble really quick, which allowed him not to be as aggressive. And then the Lakers prepared for Bam Adebayo, not for two stretch bigs.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that had to do a lot with it.
We've seen it before in multiple sports that sometimes when a star player goes out, it can actually be beneficial to that team because it creates new opportunities for new people and the defense doesn't know how to react.
Yes.
That happens sometimes in basketball. We saw it back with the Boston Celtics when Gordon Hayward was hurt. It allowed Jason Tatum and other guys like that to emerge. Same thing with like Kyrie Irving going down. Sometimes that can happen. Whether it can succeed for more than one game is to be determined. But Jimmy Butler looked amazing last night. Can he keep that up, or is that kind of a fluke performance?
I wouldn't call it a fluke, but I don't know if he's going to put up a 40-point triple-double every single night. Salute to Jimmy Butler. That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen.
So what are you hoping for out of Butler? What does Butler need to do? What is the minimum he needs to do in order to get back into the series?
He needs to keep the same energy. I'm not saying he needs to put up the 40-point triple-double every time, but he needs to keep – I think he realized now, and this game showed it, that if they want to have a puncher's chance, he has to be aggressive. And that's something he has – that for whatever reason, he doesn't do that every game. And I think he knows that now that he needs to put up – he needs to be putting up shots. He needs to be scoring like 25 at least. Keeping everyone on the defensive end, keeping everyone motivated, which I think he knows that now.
Agreed. He needs to lead on the court as well.
Yes.
I think this is the other big point I have is that, somebody else needs to emerge, whether that's Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson. One of those two guys needs to have a good game in one of these upcoming matchups.
Yesterday, that actually happened to Kelly Olynyk. He actually had 17.
He did. Kelly Olynyk actually, I think a lot of people just forgot about Kelly Olynyk this season with Bam Adebayo playing as well as he did. And people kind of just looked to the side on Olynyk, but he played rather solid last night.
He did. The defense is never going to be there. It's Kelly Olynyk.
No.
I mean, he played his role. He stretched the floor. I mean, sometimes he got a little careless. Like I saw, Kelly Olynyk, I love you, but you should never, ever, ever attempt a dribble step back three. That was, I don't know why.
That was a no-no.
He got one
on
this, but he tried to do it a few more times. And just why are you doing that? That's just, I love you.
You don't need to take off the dribble. Just spot up, shoot, and you'll be fine.
When you spot up, and you're good. And but no, he actually played well. What other adjustments they made was that they had, like I said before, they always had one of either Kelly Olynyk or Myers Leonard in the game at all times, which was absolutely necessary against a big team like the Lakers. I'm pretty sure they still lost the rebounding battle. I'm not quite sure about what the numbers were, but it was closer. I remember this time it was a lot closer. It wasn't like a JV team playing against a college team.
So with that, are we still holding on to your original prediction that the Lakers win in 6?
Yes, I believe the Lakers will still win in 6. I mean, it might be 5, just based on if they.
I would imagine 6 personally, but I could see 5 as well.
I can see 5, but the Lakers could. I think that he could snag one more. I think they got one more in them.
We'll see. The big thing is they have to ride this momentum.
They do. they've showed that this is not a pushover team, and I think LeBron knows that. I think they always knew that, but I think they got a little confident with.
They got a little complacent, I believe.
Yes, with the fact that they lost their second and third best player. But
so, with the NBA season starting to wind down and the finals winding down, I am going to be moving into my next thing with this segment, and that will be looking at intriguing teams going into the next season, kind of identify how they got there and if there is hope for them. If you remember, I did this about 2 weeks ago with the Bucks, where I talked about will they be able to keep Giannis. Today we're going into another team in the Eastern Conference, being the Philadelphia 76ers. And the question I am asking today is the process dead? So, if you don't know what the process is, I'm surprised you're an NBA fan, but a quick recap. Basically, during the era where Billy King was still the general manager of the Sixers, after Allen Iverson left, the team was kind of mediocre. They had some solid players, but they were kind of a fringe playoff team every year. In an effort to try to take the next step, the team basically kind of went all in and traded in a 14 trade Nikola Vucevic, Andre Iguodala, and some other picks to various teams in Orlando, Denver, and the Lakers for Andrew Bynum. This is the famous Andrew Bynum trade.
This was also involving Dwight Howard to the Lakers.
Yes, this was a massive 4-team trade that had a lot of moving pieces. But for the Sixers, basically, they lost Iguodala, Vucevic, and a couple picks, and they got back Bynum and Richard Jefferson, I believe it was.
I don't remember Richard Jefferson. It might have been Jason Richardson.
I think it was Jason Richardson. That's who it was. Jason Richardson. So, what was the problem with this? Well, Bynum got hurt, and so did Jefferson. So nobody who was part of that deal with the Sixers played for the Sixers. And the Sixers had a bad season. So with that, except for Drew Holiday, Thad Young, there were some solid players on that team. But they were never good enough to take that next step. They lacked that superstar. So they were mediocre, which is one of the worst things you can be in basketball. So with the GM and the coach ousted, the ownership turned to the infamous yet enigmatic Sam Hinkie. Hinkie was ahead of his time, in my opinion, was basically the best way I can describe it. He had basically decided that, you know what, this is a mediocre team. We're not going to get anywhere with this. Let's strip everything down and try to build it back up. So over the next 3-ish years, I believe, 3, 4, something like that, they traded every single asset that they had for draft picks. And it was dubbed the process. Basically what Hinkie accomplished was the first real deliberate tank in the NBA. This wasn't like with the Nets where they were trying to be competitive and it just blew up in their face.
No, they just
lost. The Sixers were doing this on purpose. So what did Hinkie do with his draft picks? Well, at first year, they got Michael Carter-Williams and Nerlens Noel. Basically, after a year, Michael Carter-Williams won Rookie of the Year, but after that, they traded him to Milwaukee for some more picks. They also then drafted Joel Embiid. They acquired Dario Saric and a first in a trade with the Magic for Elfrid Payton. They also then drafted Jahlil Okafor. After the Okafor one, that is the last pick that Hinkie made while in charge. But he acquired still, there were plenty more draft picks that ranged all the way up until this past year. So basically, the Sixers were the worst team in the NBA, and they were a joke. Instead of signing veterans to improve the team, Hinkie went for undrafted guys who some of them actually turned out to be rather well. Robert Covington, TJ McConnell, guys like that. Ended up becoming solid players, but the Sixers were still bad. Joel Embiid never really played. He was injured for about 2 years. Saric didn't come over for a while due to not having a working pay scale. Michael Carter-Williams clearly wasn't, he got traded and he clearly wasn't the star that he was hyped to be. So that led into Hinkie eventually getting ousted, basically forced out by the NBA because he was kind of making a mockery of the league. The negative press built. And they basically appointed through hereditary stuff. Brian Colangelo eventually took over. Now, Colangelo basically attempted to do whatever he did. Basically, he tried to build the team back up. Yet, the thing with Colangelo was, dear God, Twitter. The burner accounts. What the heck? So basically, Colangelo had these burner accounts where he was leaking information about the team, trashing Brett Brown, trashing Joel Embiid, trashing Sam Hinkie. Because what happened after Colangelo took over, Joel Embiid came in healthy, Saric came in, and what a shocker, the Sixers started winning games. So fans would start chanting, trust the process. Hinkie was basically a folk hero. The phrase was, Hinkie died for our wins. Well, fast forward a little bit, and Colangelo, throwing his wife under the bus.
That was the last straw.
That was basically the last straw. There were injuries that piled up. So basically after that, they built up the team, but the big one was they acquired their potentially generational talent, Ben Simmons, was the big pick. So now we get to where the story, where the process starts to fall apart, in my opinion. This is where we get to the Elton Brand era. So after Colangelo was ousted, Elton Brand was promoted to the role after being the GM of the Sixers G League team. Basically, this is where the problems start for me, because the problem I think I have with the Sixers is the failure of this process is not solely on Sam Hinkie. It's not fully on Brian Colangelo, and it's not fully on Elton Brand. The main issue is that they've had three completely differing visions of what they've wanted to do without any type of succession plan from ownership. Hinkie chose to deliberately tank seasons to secure futures. Colangelo did whatever he did to try to build the team back up. And now Elton Brand basically decided to go all in for a championship, regardless if it was the right time to do it or not. As for I mentioned this in the Bucks video. If you're familiar with TV jargon, there is a phrase called jumping the shark. It's named after Happy Days, where the Fonz literally jumps the shark. Basically, it's the point where everything goes downhill. It was a little more complicated with the Bucks one. I think the Sixers one is easy. It was drafting Markelle Fultz. It was the trade up for Markelle Fultz. Now, this wouldn't be so bad in the sense of the Milwaukee one, because a lot of this was stuff to do with outside of their control. The problem was you couldn't predict that at the time Fultz's shoulder was going to go nuts and develop the yips. I mean,
and it was so weird too, because I remember in the summer league he was killing it. Like, he was shooting fine in college. He was shooting lights out.
He looked great
in college, and then the summer league his form was perfectly normal. He was lights out again, and then the shoulder injury comes about. Which okay, I'll wait a few weeks. He'll be there. I remember how excited I was to watch Markelle play, because he was just so much fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember at the time of the draft, everybody, fans, pundits, media analysts, it was a slam dunk.
There's no question.
And I mean, his issues are well documented. Some say it was the shoulder injury. Some say it was the pressure of being a top pick. Some say he wasn't utilized properly. Whatever it was, Philly was, in my opinion, a little too hasty in branding him a bust. I get why, though. He was supposed to be the final piece to a Big Three championship core. The culmination of the process, everything finally hitting on all cylinders. When he flopped, Fultz was shipped off to the Magic for pennies, basically, of what he was worth.
Yeah, they ended up getting benched. I think they got
and it's also
it was Jonathan Simmons.
Yeah, it was Jonathan Simmons, and I think a first or something. And it's also kind of frustrating now, given the fact that Fultz is starting to regain some of his form with the Magic.
The shot's not there yet,
but he's looking more like what he was coming out of college. What makes this worse is the guy Boston drafted with the trade down that Philly gave them, Jason Tatum, the cornerstone of their franchise, a sharpshooter at the 4 or the wing, and who is destroying the Sixers all over the court. So getting back to the whole Elton Brand all-in push. Basically, Elton Brand decided to go all in. Was it the right call? Well, let's look at the core they had. Ben Simmons is a potentially generational talent that cannot be denied. However, there is a very glaring issue with his game. He either cannot or outright refuses to take jump shots. In the age of the three-pointer and the deep threes, this is just borderline fatal, especially if you're going to be running the point guard position. Until he can develop a jump shot, he will never reach his full potential. Then there's Joel Embiid, their other star, who is a very well-rounded player. I don't really have a real weakness in his actual game.
Outside of durability.
That is his issue. His issue is durability. He's missed time in every single season for either injury, rest, or a combination of both. And then I go back to the Fultz thing. Think of how history could have played out if Fultz was as advertised for the Sixers. They don't trade for Jimmy Butler. They keep Saric and Covington. The depth is fortified by homegrown talent, and the draft picks continually fortify the depth, and they have a big three. They're perennial title contenders.
They are.
So it was really just rotten luck. So what did Elton Brand decide to do? Well, here was the all-in push. They traded for Jimmy Butler with, I believe it was Saric, Covington, and a draft pick, if I recall correctly, to the Timberwolves for Jimmy Butler. That one wasn't as bad because Saric and Covington, while solid, were replaceable, and they desperately needed a star perimeter player.
And Jimmy Butler's that guy.
Yeah, however, the issue I have is the Tobias Harris trade. Tobias Harris is a solid player, and he was one of the better players on the market at the time. But to trade pretty much the rest of the draft capital accrued by Hinkie plus Landry Shamet, who looked at the time a promising shooter, it was a complete all-in push. And they, with that and some decent depth in JJ Redick and guys like that, they were expected to make a serious push for the title. However, Kawhi had other plans. A ridiculous buzzer beater three knocked the Sixers out of the divisional playoffs, but not the semifinals, and might have closed their window slam shut in their face. That was probably their best shot.
And there's nothing they could have done.
And there really was nothing they could have done in that sense. However, the upcoming offseason was the most critical in years for the Sixers. And the goal, in my opinion, was incredibly clear. They had to get Jimmy Butler back. His role was incredibly crucial for balanced approach and for team identity. They failed. Butler pointed to Brett Brown as the reason why he wouldn't sign. In my opinion, if that's the case, I don't know why you wouldn't just fire him. I think Butler was far more important than Brett Brown was. But whatever, they receive a downgrade in Josh Richardson. Okay. Then there gets to Tobias Harris. There's another guy they wanted to bring back. And they did. At a price high enough to give most basketball fans a migraine the size of Texas. $36 million a year over 5 years with no team options.
So they had to get. So he's there for the next 5 years. 3 years now, it is. Or 4 years.
4 now, yeah. That was, for a guy who is bad on defense, inconsistent on offense, and a solid support guy, in my opinion, way too much money. And I don't think anyone else was offering him anywhere near that much money.
I agree. I mean,
it almost seemed like they were bidding against themselves.
Yes, and I mean, and then bringing in Al Horford, we talked about this before.
We did talk about this. This was the big free agent splash they made. It was a redundant luxury good, in my opinion. They doubled down with net front presence. In Horford, a bruising center on Boston starting to decline. Brand threw an average of $27 million a year at him for the next 4 years. The luxury tax for this next upcoming season is it's like $50 million over the cap. It's insane. And with that, it cost them key players like JJ Redick, their 3-point specialist. So now a lot of people saw this as a championship team, but I looked at it, I was like, who's going to shoot? Are you going to have Embiid or Horford take 12 shots from the perimeter a game? It just didn't make sense to me.
I have hope that they'll realize. I mean, I don't know if the cap situation, they're going to have to really, really get creative.
It's so bad that you might even have to trade Simmons or Embiid at this point, given the cap.
I don't know if
anybody will take the Tobias or Horford contracts. Otherwise, it really depends on if ownership wants to pay the luxury tax.
You're gonna have to if you're gonna get rid of Horford or Tobias Harris, you're gonna have to throw in picks for those contracts. I mean, Tobias Harris at least looks okay, and like he's actually solid enough to the point where you won't have to give up as much of your assets.
Yeah, I think the issue with him more is the term more so than the player. Yeah, because again, Harris is a solid player, but the contract makes him bad.
Yes, and the same. I feel like the same goes for Horford. Like Horford,
he just seems like a weird fit. He and Embiid can't really coexist together. They don't really work together. It's a weird fit.
That's where I was wrong. I honestly thought it would work really well. I thought that having Horford there because he's a very good defender, because he was the guy that Boston would throw on Embiid, and he gave Embiid a lot of problems whenever they played against each other. And so I thought that would work. You can have them two controlling the paint, and both of them can, not at an elite rate, but they have the ability to spread the floor. You couldn't leave them open.
The problem is without an actual perimeter shooter, they don't get the spacing they need to make those open shots.
And I think that I think that Owen Brand knows that, and I think the rest of the team knows that, and I hope that's addressed, because I really like watching the Sixers. I really like watching the Sixers play. Ben Simmons is a really fun guy to watch. I love watching Joel Embiid. He's one of my favorite players in the league.
So quickly here, back to the question: is the process dead? Has the process failed? In my opinion, it's done. Like anything after this isn't the process. Like the draft pick horde is gone. The acquisitions have been signed. Like the process is done, in my opinion. And if we look at it, yeah, I think it's a fail. I think it failed, sadly. Though it hasn't stopped teams from imitating it.
And yeah, I mean, other teams are trying it now. I don't really have a clear-cut example on top of my head.
I mean, Phoenix has somewhat tried it. The Knicks refused to try it.
And then there's the Hawks.
The Hawks are doing it right now. There are plenty of teams that have done it.
Well, the Hawks kind of bought it. They traded for Clint Capella, which that's good.
Well, now they've acquired some of their pieces in Trae Young and John Collins, guys like that. But
they're going to be fun to watch in a few years. Maybe even next year.
But a main question for me, and this has been gnawing at me for a while now, ever since they lost in the playoffs to Boston. What would Sam Hinkie have done had he not been forced out by the NBA?
I think he would have kept.
What would have happened? Would he have just kept going and trusted his vision? Would he have done what Colangelo did and simply try to build the team back up? Or would he have seen that the current core wasn't going to work and re-rolled for more futures, like he did with Michael Carter-Williams? Remember, I mean, there were 2 years in a row where Joel Embiid didn't even see the court. It's not entirely impossible to think he just said he re-rolls for more futures.
I feel like once he would have saw Embiid and Simmons play together,
he probably would have built it back up, yeah.
Because he wouldn't have pulled Melvin Brand and went all in, but
I definitely don't think so.
Because he got those assets he wants to hold on for as long as he can.
Yeah.
I feel like what he would have done was just kind of been a little more conservative with it, kind of just here and there, not trade for a superstar.
Maybe he doesn't trade down trade up for Markelle Fultz. Maybe he takes Jason Tatum. Maybe the entire.
Jason Tatum would have been such a good fit.
There's a lot of maybes in this situation, but going forward, people think that firing Brett Brown and bringing in Doc Rivers, I don't see that making as huge of an impact as people think.
It'll definitely help.
It'll help, but the Sixers are a flawed team, and unless you can fix some of these major flaws, it's just not going to be enough, in my opinion.
They need to bring in a bench. That's the one thing they have not had in a very long time. Ever since the Jimmy Butler trade.
That was the problem with the Jimmy Butler trade, was it cost you your bench.
Your depth is gone. And then this year they just didn't have any shooting. They haven't had shooting in a couple of years, other than J.J. Redick.
And I mean, who are you going to put all your hopes on for shooting now? Matisse Thybulle, Ferran Korkmaz?
Yeah.
No. So there's been talks of like a Buddy Hield trade, maybe. I think that would be an amazing fit.
Buddy Hield's been wanting out of Sacramento for a while.
So I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know if it'll happen. If I'm the Kings, I wouldn't take Harris or Horford. I'd find another team to trade to. But for the Sixers, it makes sense.
I believe it. Maybe because Harrison I feel could fit better than Buddy Hield does in Sacramento.
Perhaps.
Sacramento's a mess because they hired Luke Walton. I can go on.
Well, they're a mess because of Lade. I had a better deal 2 days ago, Divots. And Vivek Ranadiva. Ugh, that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But as of right now, we are going to wrap this up. Thank you all very much for tuning in to the Talk with AVC. This was a long segment, but we covered a lot of ground. Danny, once again, thank you for coming on in.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of fun. Hope to see you guys next week, Monday at 1 o'clock. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Don't you dare on my show. Don't